You're about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
Welcome back. It's me, MAAJID NAWAZ, the Radical, as always, and with me, my brother, my partner, Usman Raja, the infamous. And this is another live stream episode of Warrior Creed. And we join you again in trepidation because as we speak, Gaza stands on knife's edge, and we around the world, all of us who care for human life as the fundamental premise of any civilizational aspiration, are waiting in the hopes that we avoid utter devastation in the world's largest refugee center or city or camp. Whatever word you want to use, Gazans, remember we mentioned last week, are disallowed from leaving Gaza. And so it's one of the most concentrated cities on the planet. And amid calls by the Israeli state military to flatten Gaza, to turn it into a car park, there is grave concern around the world for the humanitarian situation. And before we get into the topic today, and that's on this radical media headline, Netanyahu funded and supported Hamas for war. We're going to show you today the receipts. Last week, we introduced this topic and went into the history. And as a recap, if you remember, last week we said that the attacks themselves, and we played you a video by one Efrat Fenixon, former IDF intel, who made a video that we played on last week's episode, and we'll refresh it again for you today, don't worry, saying that something is very wrong. These attacks appear to have been tolerated. The Israeli security appears to have stood down. This is Efrat's social media page, and you can see her concern at the time with the date there, 7th of October, on the day of the attacks themselves. We'll play that video in a minute. But as a bit of a recap, what we're saying is, remember, we made the case last week that it appeared as if something very strange happened at the border and as if these attacks were facilitated by Netanyahu. And we went into some of the history about how Netanyahu historically and how Israel historically had supported the founding and funding of Hamas in the days of Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, for the purposes of splitting the Palestinian opposition and making it morally and diplomatically impossible to create a Palestinian state by tarnishing and associating the Palestinian cause for self-determination with vile terrorism. Now, we demonstrated that last week with receipts demonstrating that that was the Israel's official historic policy. We presented to you quotes from former IDF officers in the New York Times who had regretted this mistake and suggested that it was, in fact, a mistake historically for Israel to do that. But today, what we're going to do, having given you that history, and you can recap last week's episode if you like, we're not going to go back into that. Today, what we're going to do is go into a bit more detail with receipts about the current situation and how Netanyahu stands accused across the Israeli spectrum of supporting Hamas, funding them to bring about precisely this crisis so that he can provoke war, so that he can, what, shore up his position, invade Gaza, turn himself into a war hero because he was facing the country's largest ever protests in its history against any leader, which were against him for his corruption and for his own mismanagement. So instead of leaving office, Netanyahu desperately needed a war to shore up his position. We demonstrated again that point with receipts in last week's episode. We ask everybody to refresh themselves. What we're going to do today is drill down into that with some solid receipts on the level that you're hopefully acquainted with and have become accustomed to, that we present to you as such that we did with Joe Rogan on the episode on the JRE that we presented. We're going to present that level of receipts because we understand here at Warrior Creed that we're making incredibly serious allegations that Netanyahu is attempting to provoke World War III. And that's why the meme for the particular Substack Radical Media article that we're presenting today's Warrior Creed on, this one, Netanyahu funded and supported Hamas for war. That's why the meme is this particular line from War Games, the movie, because nobody wins in global all-out conflict. Nobody wins whatsoever. It's called MAAJID for a reason. That's the acronym for Mutually Assured Destruction, which is the doctrine after the Cuban Missile Crisis that ended up, once the dust settled, with the potential nuclear war there between Kennedy and Khrushchev. People realized that if we all nuclear powers went to war against each other, and Iran, mind you, though it isn't, once it joins this war, if it joins the war, if Israel conducts a land invasion on Gaza, would end up provoking World War III. And that is mutually assured destruction. So that's the topic of today. And we're going to say one more thing about last week's episode before we get into it, and that's the framing. The framing is very clear. We condemn all forms of attacks against all non-combatants, and we deem all such attacks as terrorism. And that is why we have never supported terrorism, whether from non-state actors such as Al-Qaeda, which is different to ISIS, but also from ISIS, which is different to Hamas, but also from Hamas. We don't accept the killing of non-combatants in any case, wherever it comes from, but we include, and this is something that Piers Morgan was abysmally unable to do when Mohammed Hijab spoke to him on his show last night. We also condemn the civilian and non-combatant death that the Israeli Defense Forces are offensively engaged in against civilians when they bombard Gaza. It isn't something difficult for us to condemn civilian death in every single instance. And that's the basis upon which we're going to have this conversation rather than taking sides. And we begin because we know it's an incredibly difficult topic to say, because we understand also we're addressing our Abrahamic community in faith. We begin with the prayer of Musa in the hope that nobody from our loyal audience misunderstands our intentions nor our attempted words as we try and express what is truly in our hearts for peace, because language is always limited. And that's why our master Moses uttered the prayer when confronting Pharaoh. And in Arabic, that prayer, as we understand it from the Quran, is Rabbi sharih li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli, which means, oh my Lord, open for me my chest so that and make easy for me the affair which is upon me, relieve the knot from my tongue so that they understand my words. And that is the prayer we begin with, because we are under no illusion that this is an incredibly difficult topic to have a civil conversation with. We assure you, we've had people from both sides of the political spectrum, those that support more violence coming from Hamas and those that support more violence coming from the Israeli Defense Forces, attacking us for calling for peace and asking everybody to understand the bigger picture and what's going on here, and how this was a trap, and how Netanyahu funded both sides, which we're about to demonstrate, so that he could provoke World War III, and he and his fellow globalists could lock us all into a global technocratic tyranny, as they tried to do with COVID and failed. Remember those vaccine passports? Do you remember Tony Blair, when during the Iraq war, he wanted to roll out identity cards? Do you remember how 9/11 was used as a pretext to invade two countries, Iraq and Afghanistan? And we're suggesting to you now that you're about to fall for the very same trick again, whichever side of this debate you're on. You're about to fall for the very same trap. And the Prophet Muhammad said, Al-mu'minu la yuldaghu min al-juhri marratain, which means that a true believer of oneness and Shekinah and tranquility, the true believer is not bitten from the same trap twice. Now, we understand what happened with the Iraq war after 9/11. Now we know what happened, and we're asking everybody to keep their eyes open. This attack was a false flag, and we're about to demonstrate it in real time with receipts. And yes, we know this is difficult to digest. We're your friends. Don't forget who we are. We're not your enemies. We're asking for peace. Understand what we're saying. We're not asking for war. We're not provoking anybody into war. We're asking everybody to stand down from World War III. Peace is obviously the only way. And as we say this, and because of the seriousness of this topic, we remind everybody precisely who we are. Do not forget what this badge means. for the world of counter-extremism and counter-terrorism. And right at the top, because it's in small writing, just so Piers Morgan understands exactly who we are when he refused to condemn civilian death on the Israeli side, but insisted that Mohammed Hijab condemn it on the Palestinian side. This is who we are. Osman and I and others from Warrior Creed and our principled stand, we condemn civilian death in every case. Have a look and I'll read it for you. It says, Hamas are terrorists, and so are anyone who co-founds, funds, trains, or supports them. Israel helped to found and fund Hamas. The CIA facilitated funding, arms, and tactical support for ISIS in Syria. So you want us to be against terrorism. We are against terrorism. Those who found and fund terrorist organizations belong in prison, not as war heroes leading us to fight the very groups that they founded and funded, which is why the focus remains on Netanyahu and on those security forces that he was able to manipulate and use to found and fund and facilitate terrorist operations through Hamas in this instance, and the CIA through ISIS in Syria. Now, the ISIS in Syria case is a case which we're not going to focus on today because of this hot war that is ongoing right now, and that's the Hamas one in Gaza and Israel. That's the one we're going to focus on with receipts to demonstrate that Netanyahu funded both sides so that he could bring about the very war that all of you are now fighting over who was wrong first and who committed the first crime and who deserves to die more and whose children, by the way, deserve to die more. This was provoked precisely so that we could have this reaction, this dialectic, this Hegelian dialectic, that everyone fights each other, globally, mind you. Don't think we haven't seen the death of the 6-year-old Palestinian boy stabbed to death by some 70-year-old landlord, stabbing a 6-year-old Palestinian boy and saying that all of you Muslims, this is what you deserve. Don't think we haven't seen this Belgian idiot from ISIS shooting people, and now he's been shot dead on the other side of the extreme, saying this is what the non-Muslim infidels deserve. They are trying to provoke global civil unrest so they can bring about what the job they couldn't finish during COVID, which is their technocratic tyranny. We forecasted this precise moment on JRE with Joe Rogan. Forgive the seriousness of my tone, but I hope you appreciate the seriousness of the moment. We don't seek to insult anybody. We're asking everybody to stand down because what you assume about the world is upside down, and we're about to demonstrate it with receipts. Everything you thought you knew will be turned upside down. This world has been run by inversion. But don't worry, we'll still be here and we'll still be giving you love and light. We're not here to turn anybody into an enemy. And we made it very clear last week that the utilitarian principle of the greater good that Mossad originally must have had in mind for when funding and facilitating Hamas is the principle that most other people use around the planet. Very few people are connected to the source in the way that they try and live their lives by principle consistently. But we try that, and that's why we hope that we have the moral consistency to be able to say to you what we're saying and to demonstrate to everybody listening and everybody watching that this war has been provoked by those who subscribe to the Hegelian dialect. They subscribe to creating a problem so that there can be a reaction, so that they can bring about the solution. This large-scale one involving Jerusalem, the problem they want over Gaza would be World War III. So that there can be a reaction, so that everybody in every city does what that landlord did in Chicago and stab a 6-year-old, and what the ISIS numpty did in Belgium by trying to shoot innocent people dead, so that you can have global civil unrest. And then guess what? The solution is there. So in comes Tony Blair and his fellow globalists, including Netanyahu. They're all mates, by the way. In come they with their passport systems, their digital ID, their security cameras everywhere. They're turning off your bank accounts if you don't speak exactly how they want you to speak, which is pro-war and pro-division. Right? You're going to fall into their trap, which is why we're asking everybody to calm down. And this is actually across the political spectrum. Here come our receipts. Let's start. By the way, we're going to give receipts that we understand this is an internal Israeli problem with Netanyahu. So we're going to use Israeli media to demonstrate what's going on here. So you understand fully. We're with you speaking from your perspective about the problem that we all have, which is warmongers such as Netanyahu on our side, such as Tony Blair. In the American side, such as George Bush. This isn't an Israel-only problem. No one's here to pick on anybody. We're here to be fair, and we're here to be impartial, and we're here to maintain peace and get us out of this situation, not make it worse. And with that in mind, let's begin. Here is a headline from the Times of Israel. You see the date, the 8th of October, 2023. The Times of Israel reports in the headline, for years, Netanyahu propped up Hamas. Now it's blown up in our faces. We're going to read for you a quote from that article. But again, all these receipts, just so you understand, all of these receipts we're presenting are in that Radical Media article that you can go and find and read for yourself. Everything is hyperlinked in this article. Netanyahu funded and supported Hamas. And you can go and read these articles yourself. Do not take our word. But here is a quote from the Times of Israel piece that we just showed you. And have a look at the bold. Right, but let's start in particular from the top. For years, the various governments led by Benjamin Netanyahu took an approach, and it said for power between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, bringing Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to his knees while making moves that propped up Hamas terror group. The idea was to prevent Abbas or anyone else in the Palestinian Authority's West Bank government from advancing toward the establishment of a Palestinian state. This is from the Times of Israel, folks. Most of the time, Israeli policy was to treat the Palestinian Authority as a burden and Hamas as an asset. Far-right MK, Bezalel Smotrich, forgive me if I've pronounced the name wrong, now the finance minister in the hardline government and leader of the religious Zionism party, said so himself in 2015. According to various reports, Netanyahu made a similar point at a Likud faction meeting in early 2019, when he was quoted as saying that those who oppose a Palestinian state should support the... Listen now. Netanyahu's words. Those who oppose a Palestinian state should support the transfer of funds to Gaza because maintaining the separation between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza would prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. That's from the Times of Israel. Netanyahu and others in his government expressing explicitly that it's in their interests to prevent a Palestinian state by supporting Hamas over the Palestinian Authority. And then people complain that there's no partner for peace on the Palestinian side. Why do we think there's no partner for peace on the Palestinian side if that's the Israeli policy towards the Palestinians to support terrorists over the Palestinian Authority so that there can never be a Palestinian state, so that there can never be peace? And then you have the audacity to say there's no partner for peace on the other side. We are sick and tired of this game. Remember who we are and remember the work we've done. We don't just come from nowhere into this conversation. We've sacrificed blood, sweat, and tears for this work over more than a decade, 15 years. We wear this badge with pride. The work we did was instrumental in bringing people further together towards understanding. And yet here we are, we find ourselves having to fight a case for why peace is better than war. It is unbelievable. Here is Haaretz, again an Israeli newspaper, this time on the left, making the very same point we just made from the Times of Israel. Here's the article, 9th of October is the date, and the Haaretz direct quote from their own feed. And the article, we're going to show you as well the quote from the article itself. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is a direct quote from, according to the Haaretz, I'm reading still from the Haaretz tweet, Netanyahu told his Likud party's Knesset members in March 2019. Again, Netanyahu quote, "This is part of our strategy," end of quote. Here's a quote from that Haaretz article for you. Look at the red box in the bottom. There's the quote I just read, Netanyahu's own words. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas, he told a meeting of his Likud party's Knesset members in March 2019. This is part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. We've just read to you quotes from the Times of Israel and from, so center-right, and from the left now, Haaretz, demonstrating the same point that Netanyahu's strategy has been to support and facilitate Hamas so that precisely this crisis could come about. Conflict is what they desire, not peace. And that's why we say the only option is to not play the game. Because if you encourage conflict on either side, the winners are those who get to impose the surveillance state from the top after this conflict is over. Look to World War II and understand how the Federal Reserve came about. Those of you who know understand what we're saying right now. Understand what World War II was fought over, and understand that those same Nazis continued all the way through Ukraine and culminated in receiving a standing ovation in the Canadian Parliament because the very same globalists were funding that war in Ukraine to bring about precisely this result. Those same Nazis that lost World War II never gave up, and they continued infiltrating various organs of the state through Operation Paperclip in the United States of America and beyond for the purposes of bringing about this precise moment. And it is incumbent upon everybody to challenge what we're witnessing right now, and that is the provocation to war. Here is WikiLeaks demonstrating the very same point. You can see there from their Twitter feed, the date, October the 16th, 2023, posted at 6:39 p.m. I'll read. Israeli Defense Intelligence Chief Amos Yaldin in 2007, direct quote, beginning quote, Israel would be happy if Hamas took over Gaza because IDF could then deal with Gaza as a hostile state. End of quote. Going on to downplay significance of Iran in Gaza as, quote, as long as they don't have a port. And you can see the original cable there with the fluorescent highlight there of what I've just read in the image for you. Everybody can see that. That's from WikiLeaks. This is now pretty much beyond any doubt that Netanyahu and those that support him, let's call it the Netanyahu wing of Zionism, they want war so that they can conquer Gaza and then don't really care if that triggers World War III because they have allies such as Tony Blair, such as George Bush, the globalists that back the war in Ukraine, so they can bring about their technocratic tyranny. And the point here with Netanyahu supporting that war is very clear. We've made it very clear here. Our logic is as unassailable as it is uncomfortable. But welcome to the light. We understand this isn't comfortable for people to face. But the truth is, we've already seen historic precedent of exactly this happening. We know that in Afghanistan, it was the CIA that originally backed those Mujahideen fighters against the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. We know that is precisely how Al-Qaeda was founded. We know bin Laden was originally a CIA asset. The word, the line, the quote of Malcolm X, chickens coming home to roost, is actually quite accurate when you look at foreign policy. Because it is our own seeding of conflict around the world that breeds these monsters such as ISIS. Remember I said we come back to ISIS being a creation of the CIA in Syria. And here is the direct link from ISIS all the way back to the founding of the jihadi groups in Afghanistan by the CIA against the USSR. All of this is historic fact. We're falling for the same trap again. But luckily, we're going to continue showing you these receipts because luckily, this time around, it looks like people are beginning to wake up. Let's begin with the Israeli public. Here's the Israeli public. According to the Times of London, and I'm just going to read from the article, it says, another poll found that 94% of Israelis believed the government was to blame for the war, and 59% of them did not have faith in its ability to lead the country. The Israelis are themselves realizing that they, like all of us, have been played by those who seek to divide and conquer. Here's a quote from that article in the Times of London. And you can see there the direct quote that we've just read. Another poll found that 94% of Israelis believe the government was to blame for the war. And what we're going to show you now is the Jerusalem Post saying exactly the same thing. You can see the headline. Israelis blame the government for Hamas massacre. They say Netanyahu must resign, according to a poll by Jerusalem Post staff, published October the 12th, 2023, updated October the 13th, 2023. And that's the Jerusalem Post for you. Even the Haaretz has got the message and understood. Look at this, October the 16th, 2023, from their Twitter feed. Haaretz, not tomorrow, not next week. Netanyahu must go. That's all it says. Very simple, very effective, very clear. People are beginning to understand that it was Netanyahu's design all along to provoke war. We're being asked, in particular by our brothers and cousins on the Israeli side, to stop saying what we're saying right now. We're getting messages from all over the world asking us to stop calling for peace. Because what they don't want, for whatever reason I don't understand, people to understand is that Netanyahu provoked this war and wanted it. What they're asking us to do is to march behind Netanyahu to war. And the point here is that how can you? They're saying the time isn't right for him to resign. We need to first finish the war. If you know that that's the man that provoked the war in the first place, we've just shown you all the receipts. How can you then ask us to march behind him in the very war that he started and supported and tolerated Hamas killing these civilians so that he could have exactly what he wanted, which is this war. We're not going to be that naive and fall for the trap. And thankfully, our friends are, let's say in this instance, comrades in arms, Jemima Khan is one example, are understanding precisely what we're saying here. This is from Twitter again. My comment at the top, Jemima publicly trying to convince her own brother to adopt an anti-war position on Twitter is a heartwarming thing to behold. Thank you, Jem. And that is Jemima Goldsmith's account there, responding to her own brother publicly, saying, what I know, and you know because you're highly intelligent, is the solution is not this. Targeting innocent Palestinian civilians. It will not bring back the poor hostages and it won't bring peace. And then Jemima has quoted a CNN video there in that tweet, which features an IDF soldier saying the following: this war is not just with Hamas, the war is with all the civilians. And she's attempting to show her brother that is a wrong position and that peace and supporting the anti-war position is the way forward. And that's why we believe that those who are the globalists who are backing war at this moment have made a colossal global misreading of the room when it comes to asking us to support more war. And we believe that soon this is going to become very, very embarrassing for them, because already words out. Even whether it's President Trump who understands this, we're going to show you a clip. Whether it's the Mossad who understand precisely what we said, we're going to show you how we think that is the case. Or whether it's the Israeli public, we've just demonstrated, they also understand this. Globalist war hawks, we believe, have misread the room. Have a listen to what Donald Trump had to say about Netanyahu, war, and the responsibility he believes for the intelligence failures where he believes they lie. Very interesting message from Trump, by the way. This is, by the way, a DeSantis team edit, so a hostile edit, and yet still conveys the point we're trying to convey.
Security people, can you imagine national defense people? And they said, gee, I hope Hezbollah doesn't attack from the north because that's the most vulnerable spot. I said, wait a minute. You know, Hezbollah is very smart. They're all very smart. The press doesn't like when they say it. You know, I said that President Xi of China, 1.4 billion people, he controls it with an iron fist. I said, he's a very smart man. They killed me the next day. I said he was smart. What am I going to say? But Hezbollah, they're very smart. And they have a national defense minister or somebody saying, I hope Hezbollah doesn't attack us from the north. So the following morning they attacked. They might not have been doing it, but if you listen to this jerk, you would attack from the north because he said that's our weak spot. About 15 seconds later, it was all over, and we did it. But I'll never forget that Bibi Netanyahu let us down. That was a very terrible thing. I will say that. And so when I see sometimes the intelligence, you talk about the intelligence or you talk about some of the things that went wrong over the last week, they've got to straighten it out because they're fighting potentially a very big force. They're fighting potentially Iran. And when they have people saying the wrong things, everything they say is being digested by these people because they're vicious and they're smart. And boy, are they vicious, because nobody's ever seen the kind of sight that we've seen. Nobody's ever seen it. But they cannot play games. So we were disappointed by that, very disappointed, but we did the job ourselves, and it was absolute precision, magnificent, beautiful job. And then Bibi tried to take credit for it. That didn't make me feel too good, but that's all right. So they got to strengthen themselves up.
And to explain what you just heard there, that's President Trump after the current crisis kicked off, suggesting a few things. One of them, he mentioned the security failures, and he said they got to strengthen themselves up. He specifically mentioned the security failures that we alluded to in last week's episode of Warrior Creed with that video we played for you by Efrat Fenixon, making the point on the day that this was an incredibly, to quote her, something is very wrong with those security failures on the border. Trump mentioned that, and then he also mentioned something else very interesting, which was the apparent betrayal he feels by Netanyahu for taking credit for something. In that clip, it didn't mention what it was. We'll give you the context. That's when the US went against Soleimani in Iran. And Trump said he felt very let down by Netanyahu in that moment. But for Trump to allude at this particular moment in time to criticism of Netanyahu and specifically the security failures is sending an incredibly powerful message for those who understand how messages work in this context. That was a comm, quite simple, just like this is a comm. This was Mossad. According to the New York Times, I'll read you the quote from the New York Times article. Israeli government firmly rejecting assertions contained in the leaked Pentagon documents that the leadership of the Mossad had encouraged staff and citizens to participate in the anti-government protests against Netanyahu in March. This is the article headline in the New York Times. Israel denies leaked claim that spy agency leaders encouraged protest. Obviously, Israel would deny the fact that there are Pentagon documents that have been leaked, that the Pentagon, leaked from the Pentagon, that Mossad themselves were encouraging the Israeli population to overthrow Netanyahu. Just understand for a moment, take a pause for a moment, and understand in terms of global communications how serious that leak is. And we'll show you the headline again. Mossad were encouraging the Israeli population to overthrow Netanyahu. We're suggesting the Israeli public know what we're alleging. We're suggesting that Trump knows what we're alleging. And we're suggesting that Mossad knows what we're alleging. And that even Mossad has tired of its own Netanyahu. And again, here's the article from the New York Times. Israel denies leaked claim that spy agency leaders encourage protest. And you can see the quote in bold. Leaked Pentagon documents that the leadership of the Mossad, Israel's foreign intelligence service, had encouraged the agency's staff and Israeli citizens to participate in the anti-government protests. And here again from the article is some further information from a direct quote again. But I'll never forget that Bibi Netanyahu let us down. This is the Trump quote. That was a very terrible thing. I will say that. And so when I see sometimes the intelligence, you talk about the intelligence or you talk about some of the things that went wrong over the last week, they've got to straighten it out. It looks like everybody is clued in by now to precisely what's gone on. And that's why we take the very clear view. We believe it's a morally unambiguous view, and that is that Netanyahu belongs in jail, alongside with all of his proxy sleeper cells that he and his Netanyahu wing of Zionism have been in contact with. All Netanyahu wing Israeli operatives and their jihadist proxy sleeper cells in the resistance to globalism will be revealed. Every single one of them will be exposed. It's very clear that this is the message that is spreading. Why? Because peace is possible, and those that provoke war are standing in the way. And as we said last week, peace is possible, but you just have to get out of the way first for it to be possible. And that's what we meant by, just to remind you, by this particular slide. Peace is coming, but you have to get out of its way. How is peace coming? Because already there's a framework that exists. This is from the US State Department's own website. It's called the Abraham Accords. What are the Abraham Accords? They are the framework that was set up once peace was established between the Emirates and Israel. That can be extended as a regional framework to negotiate peace between Israel and its regional partners, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, Syria, the Middle East. The Abraham Accords are a successful and lasting prototype for how that peace is possible. And remember, again, we showed this last week, that to understand what each side wants is to understand why peace is possible. And that's why we showed you what each side wants last week. And again, to show you, the prerequisite is understanding what each side wants. Saudi Arabia wants to be a regional economic and Islamic powerhouse. By being, for example, Mohammed bin Salman, the custodian of the 3 holy sites instead of just the 2 holy sites, Mecca, Medina, and the mosque at Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. That would be a huge carrot for Mohammed bin Salman, something that we cannot overstate. What does Iran want? Iran wants an end to sanctions, including on her nuclear capability. Again, something that makes everybody else shudder, but is precisely what Iran wants. And to get peace, we can give each side what they need in return for peace with their neighbors. The risks of Iran gaining nuclear weapons only exists if Iran is in a state of war. If Iran comes into these peace accords, it would no longer be in a state of war, and its nuclear capability would not be a threat. What do Palestinians want? They want a state. What does Israel want? Israel wants normalization. You give each side what they want, meaning Saudi Arabia, Iran, Syria, Egypt, even Pakistan, nuclear-capable Pakistan. They all recognize Israel, but Israel recognizes Palestine, and everybody gets what they want. Once Israel recognizes Palestine, Iran removes its declaration of war against Israel. Iran gets nuclear power and capability because it is also no longer at war. And we can then take it at face value that it wants nuclear capability for peaceful purposes. Saudi Arabia can get the grand honor of being custodian of the 3 holy sites, something that Mohammed bin Salman covets. Peace is precisely possible. In the meanwhile, for peace to be possible, we need Netanyahu not to do anything absolutely idiotic right now. What do we mean by that? We're going to show you Gaza, and we're going to show you what it looks like in Gaza right now. But before we show you that, we're going to read these slides for you because it's a video. But what's happening in Gaza, so you understand the context of the video we're about to show you. This article is from the Times of London. It's called "What's Happening in Gaza: The Scale of Destruction in Maps." And I'm just going to read the quote from the article. All of these receipts are in the Radical Media article we showed you at the beginning. This quote from the Times of London: "Some 6,000 bombs have been fired on Gaza in under a week, according to the Israeli Air Force. By contrast, in the 2014-19 campaign against ISIS, the US-led coalition dropped between only, and this only is my word, 2,000 and 5,000 bombs a month across Iraq and Syria." Understand what you just heard. More bombs have been dropped in under a week on the most densely populated city on the planet for refugees, Gaza, than were dropped for an entire month fighting ISIS in Iraq. That's why we're asking you to spare a thought for the people in Gaza, because it is difficult to imagine what that feels like and what they're going to. Some 6,000 bombs have been fired on Gaza in under a week, according to the Israeli Air Force. By contrast, in the 2014 to 2019 campaign against ISIS, the US-led coalition dropped between 2,000 and 5,000 bombs a month across Iraq and Syria. And in that context, the Israeli Mossad has tweeted out the following: "All internet service will be cut off from Gaza starting soon." That was tweeted on the 13th of October. And we've commented, add this news that we've just read, that the internet services will be cut off. Add this news to the existing power blackout there in Gaza, and the IDF will now be able to do anything they like in Gaza with no media scrutiny nor third-party oversight. And once you understand that Netanyahu was the one who provoked this war, facilitated Hamas from committing these atrocities, how safe or unsafe do you think the Gazans now feel from Netanyahu when this is what they're going through? Now I'm going to show you a video of the blackout in Gaza. With everything you've just heard on this stream, imagine how these people feel. The entire city is black. It's already had more bombs dropped on it in under a week than ISIS had dropped on them in Iraq and Syria for a month. And they await, as those Israeli politicians who have the power to determine their future, because they have incomparable power compared to the refugees in Gaza, they await until those Israeli politicians who have promised to flatten what you just saw and turn it into a car park conduct their ground invasion and repeat their air bombardment. That's what the people of Gaza are going through. And it's why those of our friends who are asking us to march behind Netanyahu in that war, after you've just learned that he provoked precisely that war by facilitating both sides to divide the Palestinian opposition and prevent a Palestinian state, would any sane person march in that context behind Netanyahu towards war? The only solution is to stand down and call for peace. And we want to end on a positive note and reassure everybody we are nobody's enemy. And this is from my own feed. I just hugged an Israeli in London. This was on Sunday in London, whose name I don't yet know. He was very distraught and in tears. Replicate peace, Abraham, accords, and love. We're not here to antagonize or scare anybody. Our point is to talk everybody down from this incredibly reactive and angry situation to understand the broader and wider picture of what's going on here, and warn everybody that precisely this was done after the 9/11 attacks so that they could bring about the invasion of two countries. And look how that ended up. And it's why we say the only winning move is not to play. And to complete that quote from the movie War Games, would anybody fancy a game of chess instead? Osman, what do you think?
I think, obviously, agreeing with what you've said there, which is our take on this, which is looking at it from the geopolitical perspective of what is there to gain and what is there to lose with this. Now let's get to the first aspect with this, which is the emotional response. I think that's the part to address first. There's a lot of emotion, and this is the problem with this. There's a lot of emotion on both sides, but that's an interesting term to use, both sides. The conversation that we had the other day, Margin, on the phone, where I said to you, I'd just been on the phone with the wife of one of my friends who's one of my close friends who's Jewish, and explained to her that actually this isn't Jews versus Muslims. This is the current Israeli administration, but also explaining to her and humanizing the Palestinians. Yeah. Because I think the big issue here is, you have to remember, my history with this has always been, I had to learn to just be from the human community rather than taking any side, because my way into Islam first was quite politicized from that perspective. I'm talking about our youth.
Yeah.
And,
not mine. Yeah. We went through a similar.
Yeah, but similar thing. But what I'm trying to explain here, Margin, was that at one point I wanted to go over to Israel and would have happily blown myself up there. Do you see what I mean? That I'm talking about. These are many decades ago as a teen, seeing things from a perspective of what was going on in Bosnia, what was going on in Chechnya, what was going on in Israel, and seeing the language of dehumanization, the language whereby what was I've got the name written down here, Muhammad al-Jarab, who was the young boy next to his next to his father. And his father's clutching him to his chest, and then he gets shot by the sniper, and the father just lifts his arms up to the sky. And I remember watching that, and the anger and hatred. Remember, I'm talking about as a youth here. Yeah, this isn't the Usman Raja now, who has brothers who are Israeli and Jewish, who we're speaking to on the phone and saying and having these very same conversations with. So let me explain where we're coming from to start with, because what I'm talking about here is when we use the language of dehumanization, and when we get a level of dehumanization going on where we only see ourselves as the victim. Yeah. And I am very specifically making this point from the perspective of my Jewish brethren who are being played by the propaganda. Yeah, they're being played because really, my argument's always been that let's hurry up and integrate the Jewish community into the Middle East. Into the Middle East, because the Jews that are now there in Israel aren't the ones that came and took the land. So I'm not talking about these settlers. Those are the friends that we have that are the equivalent of us being born as British Pakistanis here.
Exactly. Yeah. We had nothing to do with partition. Whatever atrocities were committed on those trains, we find ourselves born in Britain, and our job is to reconcile those identities.
Exactly. And the thing is with this, Margin, it's a different thing when you get to know and love the communities. So what I'm going to say is that kid that was full of hate, that kid ended up getting love at the table within the Jewish community. I know the Jewish community intimately. I've spoken at the biggest Jewish conference in the UK.
Limud.
Sorry?
Limud.
The Limud conference. And I've even been the one recently to speak to friends of mine or who are rabbis and say to them, look, Rabbi, don't represent yourself on Twitter. If you've got something to say, come to us and we can have because when you put yourself out there on Twitter and get attacked, that isn't your position. The same way with people who are of any religious authority, like an imam or a vicar. That this thing of like the Highlander, holy ground but holy people. Yeah. So we're from that mythical understanding of the sacred. Yeah. But the point I'm making with this is that when we start falling victim to propaganda and start dehumanizing, what we don't understand is as me and Majid, who will be out on these streets of London, and remember, guys, when you talk about, now I'm flipping over to the Muslim brethren here, Majid. Yeah. When they talk about Muslims, remember the people we have around us are the ones that have spent decades within the prison system. Because
I literally just had that uncomfortable conversation with a Muslim brother.
Yeah,
literally, just now.
Yeah, to explain to them, Majid, that look, that our guys are the ones that suffered within the system, and now are the ones that this message that we're putting out here, it's a universal message, and the reason being that people in Israel don't want this. The Palestinians, God forbid, are victims of the worst horrors and crimes that have been done for political means by administrations.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyone who knows an Israeli, just a normal Israeli who's living there, knows you're speaking to another person. But what we've got with this is we've got militants like the settlers, like certain members of the IDF who have committed atrocities out there. And remember, when we talk about Gaza and Palestine, you've got all of these settlements that are dotted around all of these towns right now. So even getting to the point of a Palestinian state, they've literally and purposely put these settlements around Palestinian towns to stop the ability of the Palestinians to create a state. Now, the reason I'm explaining all of this is because my vision with this, and I've even said this to Zion, what people who would describe themselves as supporters of Benjamin Netanyahu, Majid,
yeah, I'm calling them Netanyahu wing Zionists.
The Zion, so
Netanyahu wing Zionists. I can't think of
Netanyahu wing Zionists. I've even explained to them that look, the vision of this is that there can be Jewish communities living in Saudi, in Iran, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, where there's empty synagogues, that the Jews are big-bearded individuals who like to cover their heads and
sounds like
eat
Muslims.
Culture, exactly. It's like the funny thing is when you're sitting in a Jewish home and a meat dish is served to you, and you know that it's all the food there is kosher. I can sit. Do you know the relaxation you have being able to sit, eat, and then the family that you're sitting with,
our friends. No, man, we eat with our Jewish friends. That's
exactly.
We have these friends,
But the thing is with this, Majid, there isn't that separation of these are Jews, we're Muslims, because the problem you get with this is how can we get to, what are we, 2023 since and we're talking about from the Christian calendar. We're in 2023 and people aren't able to recognize other human beings. And we're now having discussions about flatten Israel, what is justified. It should be at a level, because it should be at a level when you're dealing with a human being it should be at a level that you understand that all pain is relative.
Yeah.
Yep. All pain is relative. I sit down with everyone and you have to ask me, what is this person? I have to think to myself, oh, he's Jewish or he's Muslim or I have to think, because I have to bring myself out of the factor of I'm dealing with a human being. Yeah. And this isn't some humanistic nonsense that I'm talking about, because I have to give it to Muhammad Hijab yesterday. Did a really good job in
I tweeted at him, you know, I tweeted at him publicly, said, well done.
No, I got to give him props. He did a brilliant job of demonstrating the hypocrisy.
Yeah.
The hypocrisy within, with people like Piers Morgan. And Piers Morgan, he's a great example of...
I'm still blocked, by the way. He blocked me for challenging for going on holiday to the Caribbean when we were all locked in our homes.
Oh, so...
Yeah.
That's funny, because last time I saw him was at the airport. So, last time I saw...
There we are.
Last time I saw him was at the airport. But the point being with this, Majid, that Piers Morgan demonstrates this policy that has been taken on within the legacy media of dehumanization of the Palestinians. And the problem is, when you have this, what I call the bipolar reaction, it creates, remember we used that word before, reciprocal radicalization. So on each side, you end up with people trying to justify why it's all right to kill the other.
That's the Hegelian dialect.
Yeah, and the problem with this thing, Majid, is that I'm having conversations with people whereby on one side I've got the conversation that I had last night with once again the Jewish wife of one of my friends, where we were talking about, we got back to the 2,000-year-old, no, the 3,000-year-old promise of the land of Palestine to the Jews. And I said, look, we can't go down this science fiction route of legitimizing taking land. I said, but what I am going to give you is the fact that, there's people living in that land that weren't the ones that took it over. And as we move forward, I said, look, those people should be able to integrate themselves into the rest of the Middle East. With Saudi now, Saudi Arabia itself is another land that you could say was taken over or colonized by a certain understanding of Islam. But what we do is we look at the time now and we say, look, Mohammed bin Salman is looking forward. He's looking forward and he's saying, he's looking at the fact that there's a wider Middle East here. The Emirates are looking at the fact that there's a wider Middle East here. Who isn't? Yet Netanyahu thought that he was secure when he was standing at the UN holding up a map where he showed the plans for a pipeline that would go through, and guess what wasn't on that map?
Palestine.
And the problem with this is, if you try and do this thing where you're almost insulting everyone around that region by saying to them, mercenary tactics in a way, because really, what have we got with this? If people figure this out, there is more to be gained for everyone. Yeah.
Through peace.
And the fact is that the current Israeli, I mean, we have to remember, one of the things that people haven't talked about is that the rave that got attacked by Hamas, the people that were at that rave were Israelis who would have served in the military. Yeah. Not that I'm not justifying anything. What I'm saying is that what we start seeing now is that the general Israeli now of military age, they don't want to be part of some invasion group that is trying to lock down a land and hold on to it. They want to get on with life. They want to go to Dubai. They want to go to the Emirates. They want to go and eat hummus in whichever land they're sitting, because they're Middle Eastern people now. Now, the problem then becomes that what we've got with Netanyahu is we've got a militant dinosaur. So if we had Islamic State, ISIS was the Islamic State, then we've got and what I want to do here is say about Netanyahu's type of Zionist. You could say, you could have another type of ISIS here where it's take the word Islamic out and put Israeli. Yeah. And with the same exact methodology. And the problem is all of it is reactionary. All of it. What we've got right now is a reactionary mindset whereby people are getting dehumanized to the level where a man in America stabbed to death a 6-year-old child. And Marjorie, who did he look like? Who did that kid look like? That looked like my nephew that I was training on the field the other day.
Yeah.
Your son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw.
That I looked at him and I was like, didn't he, Marjorie? When you saw the young, yeah. And the point is,
and that's precisely the thought I had when that 6-year-old boy was killed, because my son is 6.
Yeah. And that's exact. And the strange thing with this was, Marjorie, I looked at it and I thought to myself, I thought of you and I thought, oh, that's what Marjorie's going to be thinking. I knew the fire that comes up in the belly. But what do you know what we have to do with this? We have to look, and I'm outraged by that. And because of my experience with my Jewish family, I'm outraged by the other stuff that's got all guys. A citizen is a citizen. They're like,
we know who we are, bro.
Yeah.
You know, it's very clear the legacy we have, the work we've done, and the sacrifices we've made to try and
the work that's still being done, and the work they're still being done. And the problem is with this, that when we get to this human factor, guys, it's so difficult now, because right now, if you're looking at it from a human problem-solving perspective, your eyes should be wandering over to Gaza right now. Your eyes, without getting into even some group mindset with this, it's very simple to look and say, okay, look around the world at what is going on. Why are civilians being used as pawns in the game, in the politics game that is being played internationally? And this is a game of two sides right now, because you've got the wealth and influence that you can see moving over to the east right now. We can see that move. We've seen the movement from a corporate perspective that is even favoring the what's called the Middle Eastern area there. Everything has been moving in that direction. We've seen the influence of the US decline. We're seeing what's going on with the BRICS nations. So even in Israel itself, there's people that see these 2 points. Yeah. Always remember, guys, look at 1967 when America started supporting Israel. This isn't something that's been going on universally. And even with Iran itself, we see Iran with the theocracy that it has there. But guys, look at the history of Iran and Iraq, and when they did try and get democracy over there, who was it that dismantled those democracies? We dismantled those democracies. And I say we because
we're British.
We're British. Yeah, we are British. We're not part of. Yeah, I haven't got dual citizenship, nor have you, Marjid?
I've got a Pakistani identity card.
Yeah, you've got a Pakistani identity card. Yeah, but we haven't got.
Born and raised in Britain.
And we don't know.
Essex.
Yeah.
Candy Island, Southend, Leigh-on-Sea.
But
Those who know.
the problem with this, Imaj, for people to understand this reciprocal radicalization that's going on, and it is so dangerous because this is exactly the thing that led to hundreds of people joining ISIS. People don't understand this. They think to themselves, these Muslims are crazy. They go and join ISIS. No, guys. The kid on the street who is seeing racism, who's being separated from, who feels like he's not being given any dignity, sees that echoed within what's going on in terms of how his religion is generalized against. But then also, and remember, what I'm saying here is that part of this is the misinformation, even within the social dominance hierarchy of the government. I've checked my history with this. I've always been the biggest critic of Prevent. Always, since the beginning of it. Haven't I, Margin? Always.
Correct.
When Prevent started, I was the first one. I was the one who sat down with the police when they were talking about structuring channel. And saying to them, look, you can't, unless you guys are seriously educated in psychology and ideology, you can't understand this phenomenon. But the point I'm making with this is that if you take someone's dignity away, which we're talking about on a local level, whereby you've got the most literal dogmatic forms of Islam that have been allowed to be sponsored. Previous to Mohammed bin Salman from Saudi, we had, remember, in 1979, when they had the siege of Mecca, and this is completely relevant to this, to what we're talking about right now. In 1979, when they had the siege of Mecca, the Saudis figured out that they needed to get the militants that they were creating in their own country out of their country. Yeah. It's not for no reason that the Afghan conflict starts in 1979. Yeah. It's not for no reason that we see this militancy get created, and also even the word jihad get recontextualized and spread around the West. Yep. Now what I'm saying is those seeds that were spread, by the Saudis and also by the US in its game against the Russians, against the communists, those seeds that have been planted are the same seeds that have been watered by listening to the indignity and dehumanization that is being given to the Palestinians. Because to any Muslim, and I always make this point, that look, my love of the Jewish community is because it's strange. My love of the Jewish community is in my familiarity with them. Yeah. I've eaten with them. I've had the Jewish mothers of my friends say to me, "Oh, Usman, you should maybe take the bass down in when you go in and speak to people, because people get scared." Yeah, that type of concern, Margin. Yeah, the motherly human concern. Yeah. When people look at what's going on in Palestine, when I look at what's going on in Palestine, I see a man with his baby reading Fatiha to the baby, Majid. Yep. Which is the same thing I do with my child. It's because of the familiarity. Yep. The familiarity, the relational understanding. So our defense of everyone comes from that relational understanding. The danger that happens with that relational understanding is that if you don't think in a correct manner, if, like everyone around you, which is everyone nowadays, because if you're gay, you're at the Pride March. or if you're non-binary, if you're all of these labels that create zealous individuals that want to act first and think later, because the cognitive dissonance of these crazy identities, these
intersectionality destroys relationalism, is
Yeah.
what you're saying.
The thing is with this, Majid, this is why we're seeing all this insanity right now.
Yeah.
Are we going to get a repeat of what we had before? Remember, guys, this stuff, it's fine for me, it's fine for Majid. People aren't going to start with us. I'm always safe. I can walk wherever, always safe. Thank Allah. Yeah, but does my wife who's on a train get abused again? Does my mother get abused? But that's not even the concern, because it's further than that. Does the Orthodox Jew who's walking down the street, who's got absolutely nothing to do with this, get shouted at from a car or attacked? Because the problem is with this, these are local communities, Majid. You got London right now, where Londoners are, I'm Jewish, I'm Muslim, or you're Muslim and you support the humanity of Palestinians, which means you support terrorists. And you're like, no, I don't.
Let me explain. I just had to have a very tense debate with a brother, a Muslim brother who's my eldest son's age, in his early 20s. Proper, kind of on a level, street level kind of brother. And all I said was, not knowing that it would inflame him so much, that I hope we don't get World War III. And he launched into a long, let's call it presentation as to why World War III would be a good thing, because we actually need more people dead, because he's fed up of how Gazans are being treated and he wants death as the solution. And I had to say to him, bro, as your older brother, please accept. There were other people there, about three or four other people there. 3 other men and a lady and a young lad, must have been about 15. And I said, bro, as your older brother, please understand something. I'm just going to say to you one thing. And it's that our Prophet Muhammad, he teaches us not to rush to war. Do not desire to meet your enemies. A hadith, yeah? Don't rush to war, because I was saying to him, only children rush to war and few men survive them. And I said, allow me to advise you. I understand your anger. I feel upset myself, but to say we need World War III and we need more death as a solution is something which, you'll come to regret, because war isn't a pretty thing whatsoever. Nobody should desire it. It's incredibly ugly. And anyone who's even come close to it understands how ugly war is. And I said to him, let me tell you something else. All the men who are telling you war is ugly and that you shouldn't desire war are the only ones who'd stand there for you and fight on the front lines. All of the others who are encouraging war, like gobshites on media platforms, will be the first to cower under their desks with the politicians who fund it, because basically they're nothing but loudmouths. And I said to him that we've got to be really careful, because he was furious. He really wanted war, and he was upset that I wasn't calling for war on the Muslim side. And I reminded him, and I said, bro, I've got Israeli friends who are as angry as you telling me that I'm wrong for not calling for war on their side. And I said, and this is the point you just made, Usman. I said to him, you've got to remember something. And I said, please, also speak with a bit of respect, because we are from the generation that literally joined that war on terror, went to jail for it. I said, don't forget who we are and what we deal with. We understand the extremities of the argument and the case you're making now. That's the life we've lived. I've been in prison with the assassins of Anwar Sadat in Egypt. He was killed in 1981 because he made peace with Israel. Egyptian Jihad assassinated him in 1981. Their teachers, such as Salim al-Rahal, were members of my former organization, Hizb al-Tahrir. When they assassinated Sadat in 1981, all of those who were involved directly in the violence were executed by the Egyptian regime, taken over by that time by Sadat's successor, Hosni Mubarak, who put in place an emergency law that lasted all the way until I was detained in 2002, released in 2008, under that very, released in 2006, under that very same emergency law. Now, when Sadat was assassinated. Those that were involved, as I said, were executed in that case. But those that were not the officers in charge of the coup, but the soldiers who participated in it, some of those were given life sentences. 2 of those were in Mazra'at Torah prison with me. The assassins of Anwar Sadat, the last time any Arab regime tried to make peace with Israel, were my cellmates and my friends. Salah al-Bayoumi, who left me with a signed copy of the Quran, and Dr. Tariq, who got his doctor degree while in jail. By the time I was imprisoned in 2002, those 2 gentlemen had been in jail for longer than I had been alive. I was 24 years old when I was imprisoned, and they'd been in jail for 25 years by that time. And the point I'm making is, whether it's in my example, in my case, or Sman Bro, in your case, with the some of the most dangerous Al-Qaeda convicts in Britain and in the US, that you have been working very closely with to talk down on these very subjects, from violence to a rehabilitative state. The point is that I said to this brother, remember who you're talking to. We've seen this game before. We've seen this movie play out before. We've seen it play out in Algeria with the GIA after the FIS elections were cancelled. We've seen it play out in Bosnia. We've seen it play out in Afghanistan. We've seen it play out in Iraq. We're twice your age. We're both 45 years old now, 46 soon. And we have more experience than those years would suggest. And we're asking everybody to understand exactly who we are when we say to you that you are being played. This is a trap, and World War III is not the solution. And even those people, such as the assassins of Sadat, we took your arguments to the extreme. This anger that you're feeling, we took it to the extreme, our generation, before the internet was around to talk us down from it. And those people, such as the assassins of Sadat that I've just mentioned to you, I can say this. Osman, you've seen the handwriting in my copy of the Quran from them. I can say this. By the end of it, when they were in prison for longer than I'd been alive, and I went to Mazra'at Torah prison, lionizing them as my heroes, they said, sit down and understand that we were used and violence isn't the way forward.
Yeah, and this is the thing, Majid, that what we've got right now is we've got zealotry and nationalism weaponized. Yeah. And that word religion becomes a very interesting term right now with this. Yeah, like I've had to explain that what we've got right now is we've got something where religion, the concept of religion being something that binds people in an ideology. Yeah. And this ideology, instead of it being a present state philosophical stance, which actually for the Gazans right now who are praying Fatiha over their dead babies does become that.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying, so that's a different thing. But what I'm talking about here is when you've got religious understandings whereby your end point, there's like the ends justifies the means. Yeah. And I'm talking about this from all sides here, because what we've got is whether it's this new form of jihadism where it's completely reactive and emotional, or you've got this militant Zionism where as soon as you talk about the Gazans or you talk about the Palestinians or you talk about the Muslims, you get a talk about 1930s and the Holocaust. And I say, well, the Holocaust was a uniquely European phenomenon, which had nothing to do with the Jews in the Middle East, which had nothing to do. And even from the point of view where, now this is getting quite complicated now, where when you sit down with the different groups of Muslims and the different groups of Jews, Majid. Yeah. If you sit down with the guys from New Trade Carter, you'll get a different viewpoint than you will for. So we're not talking about one homogenized monolith versus another monolith. Yeah, we're talking Islam versus Judaism. We're not talking about that. This is political. This is a militant, horrific administration full of congratulating warmongers. Netanyahu has been, he's always been known, the bravado, I'm the David of this time type of persona that he tries to put across. But the point is with this, anyone who's listening to this, if you're Muslim and you're listening to this, understand, if you study Judaism, it is a beautiful tradition. It is a beautiful tradition that traditionally the Jews and the Muslims, historically, there really wasn't any separation there. Yeah, Maimonides was the best friend and brother of Salahuddin. Yeah, and it said, and in Judaism it goes from Moses to Moses, there will never be another Moses, referring to Maimonides. Maimonides' son was a Jew who also followed a Sufi tariqah. So what does that say? Now, this is the thing. Historically, these things were understood as philosophical stances, and it's a very comfortable term because people get to treat each other as humans. If you've got two human beings standing next to each other and it's just a philosophical stance and its principles, then you've got to remember the thing that Islam talks about is it brings that brotherhood regardless. It talks about that brotherhood within humanity.
All right. We've gone over, it's 1 hour, 35 minutes. Okay. So I'm going to ask you if there's any last words from your end, and then I'm going to wrap up with some announcements.
I think the last words with this have to be, guys, we've talked about this before, the concept of living within the sympathetic state. Yep. This idea of fight or flight. And that fight level, this idea of the limbic system, whereby you're firing from a purely emotional perspective, thinking you belong to a certain group. When really, if you're living in Salisbury, then, and the local rubbish doesn't get picked up, you're going to ring up Salisbury Council and get together with your neighbour and make sure your rubbish gets picked up. Yeah. What I'm talking about here is when it comes to circle of influence and the things that affect you, look at where you're at, look at what's around you. And guys, this should demonstrate to us when we have talk of World War III that we really are in a global community. Guess who understands that? Klaus Schwab.
Yeah. That's why we say, look, the solution will be global, but it's either going to be global centralization under a technocratic tyranny, or it's going to be global decentralization. But both are global. Understand what we're saying here. Decentralization is also global because there's no such thing as decentralization if it isn't everywhere. Decentralization is weakness if there is decentralization in one bit and everything else is centralized. Then all decentralization means is weakness. Decentralization only works if everything is decentralized, which means the whole planet. Every authority needs to be weaker, not stronger. On that note, we've got to end. Osman Bro, has been a great show, but it's 1 hour 38. 1 hour. Oh, actually, it's not that bad. I was looking at the clock. It's 4:38, but actually, because we started late, we've only been going for 1 hour 18 minutes.
Exactly. Yeah. So
we've got another 10 minutes.
Okay. So
yeah, we've got another 10 minutes, which we could carry on speaking. It's up to you. Do you want to carry on, or what do you want to do?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a need here, Martin, because
Yeah, carry on.
I think what we've got here is we've got a lot of remember the message I sent you about we're going back to after the cognitive shift, and yes, I know I didn't finish my sentence. The cognitive shift that happened post-COVID.
Yeah.
The cognitive shift that happened post-COVID, we got to a more human situation from the perspective of, yes, 67% of humanity locked themselves away and then came out afterwards and said, you know what? The things that we thought, the issues that we had don't really matter as much. We need to move forward. But what we started seeing happen once again, like we've seen with India, with Modi and the Islamophobia there, what we saw with the Uyghurs and China, we started seeing once again the ideas and false tropes that were put out post 9/11 being brought back in. Because what we have to understand here, guys, is there is a multi-million pound counter-terrorism industry. The whole reason I left the Home Office was because I wasn't willing to be part of an industry.
And you remember what we were saying at the time when the Jan 6 stuff happened? We were saying the same terrorism that they were using and they weaponized after 9/11, they were then weaponizing against Trump supporters.
Yeah.
We're showing everybody that now it's again being weaponized to provoke war in Gaza.
And also to destabilize what we've got in Europe and the West in terms of there's been a lot of movement in terms of community because of what happened with this overly muscular neoliberalism with the whole trans movement and the conservative. Yeah, so on one side you had the conservatism of the Abrahamic faiths finding more unity to battle against something. Yeah?
And that's also that emerging unity, by the way, is what they're trying to shatter with the division caused by this, so that the Abraham Accords, which rests on Abrahamic unity to succeed, cannot succeed. If you destroy Abrahamic unity against tyranny, you have no Abraham Accords.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with this is if someone listens to this with their red, blue, or whatever color t-shirt on that they think they belong to, they're going to have the group response, which is, no, but they're our enemy. But then when it comes to the micro interaction, when they actually meet someone from the other group that they consider the other, all of a sudden there's a human interaction that happens. Guys, the human interaction is the real thing.
Yeah.
This imagined view of the other is just in your imagination. Human beings want the same thing. And in fact, the idea of difference allows us to make life interesting and to connect through that.
Yeah.
This and it's insane that I'm having to justify this, MAAJID, because these are conversations I've been
I've had to literally plead with people that it's okay to say peace is a solution to this.
Yeah.
As if I've said something wrong. I'm offending them by saying I don't want to go to war.
Yeah, well, we've seen with the media right now, MAAJID, with all of these so-called liberals, even these ex-comedians who are doing their talk shows, coming out and justifying genocide. Well, I mean, that is what. Look at the dictionary meaning of genocide.
That's actually interesting because I put out a message earlier. Obviously, you recall this, Usman. We were warning of the emergence of the Riddler and then the Joker. I've said, watch out for the Two-Face.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah. Watch out for the Two-Face. Those who speak the language of peace while also speaking the language of war.
Yeah. And this is the point, isn't it? At which point does humanism stop? And I remember once again in New York, making that same presentation where I wrote humanism on the board, MAAJID.
Yeah.
And I said, who agrees with this? And everyone in the room put their hands up. I said, okay, it's interesting because at the underclass and working class level, humanism is very suitable because it's the idea that, everyone's opinion matters. We've all got equal rights. Human life means something, yeah? But as soon as we start going up the scale to when we get to that geopolitical perspective, that humanism ends because we get a discussion about whether it's okay to have collateral damage. And guys, you might be hearing this word collateral damage for the first time here. This is the first time I'm hearing it. I've heard about collateral damage when a wedding party in Afghanistan got blown up, and was it Barack Obama? Oh, sorry, it's collateral damage. Yeah, it's collateral damage for you, but what about if pain is relative and there is someone? So maybe it doesn't matter about someone crying and screaming up to the sky in so much pain that if that pain could find form, it would unfold the universe.
Yeah.
But maybe it doesn't matter about that. But then whose pain matters?
Physically, by the way, it will unfold the universe, because there is, you know, at the end of the day, that kind of pain will have consequences. We mentioned it last week. It will have blowback. That is the way the universe works, because it's an imbalance. And every time there's a pendulum swing, it has to swing back the other way.
But Margie, look, 50% of, and this, I found this a very interesting demographic, because we were told about 50% of the people in Gaza are under the age of 13, yeah?
Yeah.
But then it's the same thing with Afghanistan as well. Very similar demographic. Same thing with Pakistan as well right now. And what ends up happening with this is when those kids who have grown up with this, guys, I've sat down with, in fact, I had to disarm a young Afghan, I don't know if you want to call, young Afghan British jihadist who tried to stab me while I was while we were sitting in the car.
Yeah.
And his whole trauma had come from the fact that he'd seen his family killed in Quetta by Pakistani forces during counter-terror raids. Yeah. Now, the point I'm making here is that I was lucky, but you know what I believe, that, you know what we believe, Majid, that our thread's already cut, so, and all victories with Allah. But the point being with this, that attack, the fuel for it was the trauma from that situation. And being people that are dealing with this in the front line of this, how many of those kids are we creating now?
That's it. On that note, we're going to have to actually end it now, but that's a good point to leave it on, because it is something to think about, which is that every action has its reaction. And are we seeding more reactions by our actions? Today's Warrior Creed, folks, was based on this article on Radical Media. Netanyahu funded and supported Hamas for war receipts. We hope you've seen the receipts over the course of this live stream and podcast. We've demonstrated, we hope, that it's a strange game. The only winning move is not to play. Do not fall for the trap of calling for World War III, because the globalist technocratic tyranny is the only thing that wins from there. Now, what I'd like to do, final message for everybody, is to focus you all on our viewing figures on Warrior Creed on Rumble. The week that after which Lawrence Fox was arrested for appearing on our show, that show had 50,000 views. The week before, it had 77,000 views. Last week, where we demonstrated that Netanyahu had ceded the funding of the founding of the group Hamas, only had 18,000 views. And that was all after Lawrence Fox getting arrested by appearing on our show, and then war kicking off in the Middle East. We've seen our viewer figures on Rumble, and that's why I'm going to put the views in quotation marks now, go from 70K down to 50K down, to last week, apparently only 18K. And I say apparently because we don't believe a word of it, folks. Something funny is going on, incredibly funny. It makes absolutely no sense that a national political figure and leader of a political party with an independent MP in the House of Commons in the UK, Lawrence Fox, leader of a political party in Britain with representation in Parliament, gets arrested after appearing on our show, and our viewer figures are apparently plummeting on Rumble's ticker. We know we're shadow banned on all social media platforms. We know we get taken off YouTube. We know you can't find us even when you search for us on social media. We understand that they want you all and us to think that we're alone and nobody agrees with us. Do not, when you look to Warrior Creed, look at the viewer figures and think this message isn't popular. We know how far and wide our message spreads. You are with us in this, and we're just going to say we don't believe a word of it. These figures, there's something incredibly wrong with our social media presence. We know people get warned when they follow us on Instagram and it says this account posts disinformation. We know that on Twitter, we are severely shadow banned and we have absolutely very limited reach in terms of our posts, but we carry on regardless. What we'd ask all of you to do is spread word by word of mouth. Join us here every week, Tuesday, 3 p.m. or 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. UK time on Warrior Creed. And every week at that time, we'll be giving you our latest analysis and perspectives, but we rely on you to use your word of mouth and friendships and relationships to tell others that you won't get this content from anywhere else. Those of you who are listening on Radical Media on MAAJIDNAWAZ.substack.com, we ask you to spread word as well and renew your subscriptions. Those of you who are on monthly subscriptions, we ask you to become annual subscribers. This studio you see me speaking from behind you is only possible because of your subscriptions. The fact that Osman and I collaborate on this show is only possible because you watch this Rumble live stream, and Osman and I are partners in this regard. But its success is what it requires for us to continue. We have foregone opportunity to do this work, and we ask all of you to subscribe, to resist the temptation to believe that nobody is listening to us. It's the exact opposite, which is why we're being suppressed. It's why we're being targeted. We're in fact encouraged by this because we know that when you're over the target, that's when you get most flack. But we ask you to believe that and spread word that if you want the true messages to resist tyranny and globalist technocracy, then look for those voices that, regardless of being suppressed, never compromise on their principle. We hope you see the Warrior Creed live stream is one of those. And as we say, come back every Tuesday, 3 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. EST, or on Radical Media, MAAJIDNAWAZ.substack.com. Upgrade your subscriptions. If you're monthly, please join us, become annual, or if you're a free subscriber, become a monthly subscriber. We'll see you next Tuesday on Warrior Creed. And as we say, in this particular episode, it was a strange game. The only winning move is not to play, and we suggest instead a nice game of chess.
Now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warrior